Brent is a developer and a big proponent of no code movement that is evaluating the trends in by not sitting on a couch and judging, being a part, but he's actually in the middle of things and he's evaluating himself. He's launching products, launching projects, and sharing and giving a clear retrospective to himself and to everyone who is interested about how it went, and that by that bringing a ton of value of people who are thinking about doing that themselves. So Brent, welcome. It's always great to see you. You're always an inspiration, and let us know, what are you busy with these days? What's launching myself about right now? What's your the latest and the greatest trend, and what are you up to these days, basically?
Yeah, wow. Well, first off, thanks so much for the incredible introduction. It is really funny to me to be, considered someone who's like older in the no code space, when I guess I've been using no code tools for maybe 6, 7 years now, but like that's considered super long in the no code
Yeah,
space.
a lot.
So it's always funny to just kind of see how far things have come. And yeah, I think, as you mentioned before, I've done a lot of no code projects, and I think the best use of my time here would just be to go over some of the lessons I've learned from those no code projects, because I think there are lessons in there for everyone, hopefully. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen, because I've kind of got like a pretty good process if screen sharing is allowed. Let me go ahead and just see. It looks like it might
Yeah,
not be.
now
All
it should
right.
be. Yeah, check
Okay,
it out.
great. All right, fantastic. Are you able to see my screen all right?
Yep, all good.
All right. Well, yeah. So this is my website, launchingmyself.com, where I have basically tried to put all of the products I've built in one place, where not only I can, learn and kind of talk about the lessons learned, but also just share with other people how these projects went. And one of the really funny things that I've tried to do now that, these projects have been live for a long time is I try to keep these projects online no matter what. So like my very first business that was back in 2015, that was a no code tool. I still I go through all the trouble to make sure the websites are still live. And that's just a really cool indicator for me of like personal growth, to be like, wow, this is how far I came. Like this is like my very first, I think it was like a WordPress website that like I started working on in like 2014, and was like, this is going to be, like this cool business, and it ended up not being. But for the purposes of today, I'll just cover the kind of the no code software apps that I started to work on. So the first was when I really got excited about Bubble. I immediately had an idea based on a blog post. And I think a lot of people have kind of had this like inspiration where like they see something being talked about online, and they think like this could be a good opportunity. Maybe people will have these pain points. So that's what happened with me and TopDo. I started working on it in 2015. The site is still live. And basically the idea was, I have so many things on a to-do list. It would be great to build a tool that could prioritize these items for me, and tell me what I should work on first and what I should work on next. So I found this blog post. I forget who wrote it. It was probably someone in the productivity or self-help space. And it was a really popular blog post about like, here's how to ask yourself these questions before getting started. So I got really excited about that. I put them all into a product format. This is my first time really getting into Bubble. And I'd say my biggest mistake here was I made the mistake so many people make when they first start using a no-code tool, is they get so excited about it that they just like have complete tunnel vision and only focus on building. So I spent probably 2 or 3 months learning Bubble. I built the product out. I was like making sure everything was right. This is my first time, in like a what you refer to as like just like a drag and drop editor, right? Where there's no strong positioning. So I wanted to make every pixel perfect. And so 2 or 3 months later, I put the product out there. I linked to it in the comment section of that blog post, and like was ready for my ta-da moment, like this is how a business should run. And then of course, I think like maybe 150 people signed up, which was like pretty good, but then like no one actually ended up using it. No one paid for it. And I was just back to square one. And that was obviously my first lesson learned in, oh, okay, I guess I really got like tunnel vision here.
Yeah, I think it's
So
called trough of sorrow, like when you get an
yes,
initial spike,
yes.
and then and then
Yeah. So my trough of sorrow here was, instead of going out and talking to people who had maybe read the blog post, I just assumed that they all needed this tool, went out, spent a lot of time building it, didn't talk to anyone again, and then like released it to the world. Here it is. Luckily, I built it with Bubble, so I only wasted, maybe a month or two versus maybe potentially years. But that's one of my favorite things about building with no code as well, is even when you make mistakes, which you will early on, at least those mistakes cost you less time and less energy and less money, right? You don't have to hire a huge dev firm. You can kind of build
a
these things
consultant,
on your own.
Exactly.
So you'd think I had learned my lesson with TopDo, but my next project, skipping ahead a couple years, was JustPublish. And this was a tool. Again, I think it was I was looking at a few tools out there that was like, I think one is like justfndoit.com, where it was like you can set goals and then like pay charities that you don't like if you don't hit those goals. I thought like that's a really cool idea for getting things done. Because I have this problem all the time where like I want to commit to something, but I don't have like a concrete way of doing it as a solopreneur, someone who's working mostly on projects themselves. So I built this tool also in Bubble that I was pretty excited about. And what I thought was, well, if you have a blog and you have like a draft blog link, you could set the link inside the tool and then set the deadline, and then it would automatically tweet your link out on that date. And it would be really embarrassing if it went out and it wasn't there. So that would kind of force you to actually write the blog post. And this one, I had learned my lesson, I think, from the first project where I actually started talking to people about it. So I went out, talked to some friends, talked to some people on social media, and said, like, hey, do you have this problem too? People said, yes, we do have this problem. And so I said, great, I'm going to build this tool. You'll be able to set these artificial deadlines. You'll connect to your Twitter account. This is my first time using the API connector in Bubble. And so I was hooking up Buffer using the Buffer API to be able to schedule a blog post. But the real secret here was that when you scheduled it, even though it was scheduled in the Buffer API, there was no option to delete it. So once it was scheduled, it was going to go out. And I guess you could delete it when it first tweeted out, but it was going to happen. So anyway, long story short, I spent a lot of time building this in Bubble as well. And I was a lot more confident because I talked to people, they had validated this pain point. Then the product launched. I sent it out to all these people who seemed very excited about it. And then I just watched in the back end in my Bubble database, because I could see every time someone created a new deadline, and no deadlines are being created. People were signing up, but no one was creating any deadlines. And so that was a huge, huge scary moment, because I was like, wait a minute, like that is what this product is. How come no one's actually doing the thing? And so what I ended up doing was just pulling aside a few users, hopping on the phone with them, and like having them walk me through their experience on the app. And everyone just said, well, I'm not sure, and it's like a little scary to actually set the deadline. So I just like, I'm not going to. And that was, again, validation that probably cost me 2 or 3 months time that I learned once again the hard way, that even if you have people that say they're excited about something and they want to use it, once you actually build it, if it has, if it requires anything that's even remotely painful or involves social pressure, there's the good chance that like someone actually won't do it, and they won't
not even
actually
the
product.
fancy animation help, right?
Totally. But yes. But yeah, so what's interesting is, there's always a silver lining to failures. And the failures of, TopDo and JustPublish were basically by failing with my first two Bubble projects, I had become really, really good in Bubble. Everything from designing dashboards, backends, working with APIs. And at that point, I felt pretty confident as a teacher to be able to start the Code Free Startup and teach Bubble courses. And so the silver lining to that was, I there were some things better, than about those failures. But still, it's really hard to build a software company, a SaaS product, and it's with no code. It's, you are able to overcome some of the challenges with traditional products, but you're still going to run into the 99% of failure that most people can't escape. Yep. So yeah, so just for time, I'll skip ahead a few projects out there, but this is what I'm working on now, which is NotionMetrics, which is my latest project in Bubble. And right. And this I launched October of last year, and it is by far the most advanced thing I've built in Bubble, because it basically allows people to embed live updating metrics into Notion pages that pull in things like visitors, visits to their website, subscribers from their ConvertKit, or monthly recurring revenue from Stripe. And on a technical level, this was a product that took so much time because I had to integrate APIs with all these different tools. I had to build a live refreshing metrics tool. I had to build the graphical component and figure out how to get embeds to work in Notion. So lots of different stuff happening. And I launched this tool. I was very excited about it. I'd worked on it for probably 5-6 months. And you'd think after all these years, I would be just like instant success with any product I launched. And unfortunately, it wasn't the case. So with NotionMetrics, when it first came out, so if you see here that there's like some interactivity, my first embed did not look that great at all. I don't know, it's probably way too small to see here, but the first embed window did not look great. It was just this, like, I was just trying to get my V1 out, and in doing so, the embed itself, the actual image of your metrics, was a standard image. You couldn't like hover over it to see any metrics, and it wasn't that useful. And so this was really, really hard to learn, because people were downloading the product and people were using it, but no one was paying for it. And I think once I hit maybe 400 or 500 users, I really, like, my growth rate just stalled, right? I hit the early adopters, people weren't subscribing, and I couldn't build this into a viable business. So this was a tricky thing to learn as well, because I think I initially wanted to kind of worry about so many different things. The first is in Bubble, especially, and with most no-code tools, if you're building a product that's even for consumers or for startups, which is kind of who I was targeting, you want design to be one of the chief priorities, because you can't really get away with a product that doesn't look well designed anymore, unless it's maybe for an enterprise business, because right now we're just used to such good design every day in every single website, so that if someone hits a website built in Bubble that looks closer to like what I did with TopDo, they're going to be suspicious, right? Their immediate reaction is just like, why does this look like it was made in the early 2000s versus 2021? So I focused initially a lot on my website, making sure that like the design was clean and that it was just like roughly easy to use. And then I tried redesigning the dashboard, and none of those metrics actually stuck. So once again, I got on the phone with more users, conducted some like user sessions saying like, actually take me through your Notion pages and show me what's happening. And it just turns out that people, once they installed the embed code, they were just not getting a lot of value. So I actually had to go back and completely rebuild that from scratch. So the lesson is that really, if your product isn't good enough, it's just never going to scale, and you're really going to need to put a lot more time into it. And so what I had to figure out at this point was, is it worth going back to the drawing board and, instead of giving up and like actually rebuilding this whole thing? And luckily in Bubble, that didn't take too long, but it was still a huge reinvestment. And now the product is growing quickly. People are paying up to $15 a month for it. From I think like $5 was kind of my average MRR for the first one. And so yeah, it's a long journey, and it's cool to be able to track along the way, building in no code. But even to this day, there's still so many lessons to be learned. And I think what I keep coming back to is no code just helps you learn them faster.
This is awesome. Yeah, this looks pretty good actually. I would, yeah,
Thanks.
totally give it a shot. Yeah, this looks great.
Amazing.
Totally. I mean, yeah. Thank you, Brent, for sharing that insight and that information. Absolutely. I mean, we've all either have been or will be exactly through jumping through the same hoops, understanding that okay, building a product is something that probably got you here in the first place. People that are into no code are mostly really all about their product and really enjoy building it, but then they soon realize then it's it's the easy part is actually building the product, at least the initial version for sure. The
Yes.
most difficult part comes right after, in trying to understand whether that's really what people want to use, first of all, and second, those are separate questions, by the way, if they really want to pay for it. So that comes next. And and then the third question, which you just described, is how to get from the early adopters to the more of a mainstream portion and of the market. How do you hit the larger amount of people that would find that useful? And absolutely, that's totally something that every project would go through. And thanks to your learnings, actually, I'm hoping that more people will start planning for it early on. And I'm absolutely positive that when people are going to be checking out your website, in which you're so generously sharing all that advice and all that insight from all those both failed and successful projects of yours. I'm hoping that people will be more prepared. But yeah, to be frank with you, from my own experience, even if you know all about this in advance, or at least you think you do, you kind of don't, because when you actually
Yes.
do get into those situations, you realize then, that's what he meant. But that doesn't save you, but it makes it a little more efficient, I guess, to
Yeah,
get going.
and that's I think a main takeaway is there's so many different key elements involved in becoming a success, especially when you're working either by yourself or with one co-founder. And there's so many different skill sets that you need to pick up. You could be very diligent about customer interviews, as an example, but you don't know how to ask the right questions, and then all of a sudden, you've talked about your solution and not your problem, and you've validated just by kind of forcing people into thinking that they're going to use your solution, and they never will. And so you really have to nail so many different distinct aspects that require, building a no code, user psychology, design. It's really amazing, and I think that's, if you're expecting some bumps along the way and you're okay with having the learning experiences as you go, then again, it becomes much more of a journey rather than all these frustrating pain points.
Yeah, totally. That will be a very, very painful experience in case you'll be focusing on something that does not work. Because actually, one might think that it's actually good to get more things not working. You're kind of ruling them out early on rather than investing a ton of time into both.
Exactly.
All right, Brent, thank you. We actually have a few
Of
questions,
course.
both from the community that are attending this conversation, and I might ask you a couple more for myself,
Sure thing.
representing hopefully some of the opinions as well. So let's get to it. So we have a question about, I guess, business planning and business thinking. So what kind of business problems that Bubble will solve best? I guess that's kind of a general question, but I'm sure you've thought about that a lot, obviously. So what's your
Yes.
take on that?
Yeah. So I think, Bubble's come a long way with design capabilities and functionality, but I still think that Bubble's biggest strength is as a B2B tool. So if you are able to sell to businesses a service that you've built with Bubble, you're going to be in a much better position than building a consumer product with Bubble, because as I mentioned with design, consumers expect such high design UX experiences from their consumer apps these days, that can really drain you. And some of the biggest successful projects I've seen from past students and others building on Bubble is if they're selling to other businesses and they are just maybe experts in an industry and they design something that just really easily fits into a need, because business users don't need that same design expertise.
Wow, that's a gem of an insight, actually, because you kind of keep that in mind because the enterprise software is infamous for being ugly, and people kind of don't care because that's, something that they use to get their job done. But that's usually also where the money is, and people don't connect these two dots together. That, something that brings money and where people are not really all that picky about the design, actually a very lucrative niche. So for sure, that's actually an
Exactly, right.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a lot of people that are focused on, oh, we need to make enterprise software, pixel
yeah,
perfect. Well, actually, it doesn't
yeah.
have to be. If you
No,
invite someone, and all they're trying to do is get their job done, and you invite them to a Bubble app that doesn't look great but gets the job done, they will pay you lots of money for your tool, and that's where you
totally.
can start to charge, some serious recurring revenue.
Yeah, that's an amazing insight. Thanks, Brent.
Of course.
Next question, actually, the polar opposite of the first. So Mitch is asking if there are any good tips on how to work through design and making things look good, like what you suggested about your latest application. So is it 99 Designs? Are there special books or libraries that you would recommend, or maybe some YouTube channels for people to follow about that?
Yeah. So, I'd say my biggest piece of advice, especially if you haven't been building in Bubble for too long, is work off of a template. So I know there's so many different Bubble templates out there. Insert zero code plug, exactly. But really, really, if you want to get started and you are willing to spend the couple hours that it takes to get up to speed with how a template works, then you're just not reinventing the wheel. And so I've done that with a majority of my new Bubble projects, just to get design that looks good. Because one of the biggest problems just starting from a blank page in Bubble is, unless you are a UX designer, or you have a significant experience working in Figma or Sketch, then just dragging something out on the page and having the element look good is going to be a really high lift. So I'd
Yeah.
say start with templates. And then one of my favorite books on the subject as well is a book called Refactoring UI. And it's actually designed, mostly for coders, but the Refactoring UI book, and I believe there's also some YouTube videos on it as well. It's
Mhm.
great because it just shows you these UX patterns in general that you want to follow. So, for example, leave plenty of white space, and then come back and then have less and less white space. Avoid, putting objects in a list with certain elements that take up too much room on the screen because there are objects in a list. So all those things that you really wouldn't know unless you've come across one of these resources, it's worth, spending a hour or two reading the Refactoring UI book, or on their YouTube channel. And so that's a good resource.
Wow, that's more than Mitch was hoping for. I'm sure. I definitely got more out of it. So yeah, I would second that completely because, yeah, there are people who are very good at design. They spend like education, they spent like years in learning this stuff, or maybe they're just naturals. There are cases like that as well, when a person just starts in off a blank canvas and boom, you got it. I mean, it looks great and it feels great, but that's probably like very few exceptions out of the bigger majority, in which you're going to be spending hours and hours of time, and it's still not going to be perfect to yourself to get started with. And if you're going to be asking other people, there's going to be always something that somebody will not like. So
Yeah,
and even going that path, whatever you'll be trying to create yourself is always going to be inspired by something that exists. It's going to be either a close resemblance or a carbon copy. So why not start from a
exactly.
template that actually already has some things which you're looking at, and you just spend yourself and save yourself a ton of time trying to get it off the ground yourself. And
Yeah,
refactoring UI, amazing recommendation. Thank you, Brent.
of course.
Moving on with the next question. Yeah, and actually that's a continuation of the previous one. So Mitch actually gives an example. So he has an app with a lot of users, but it doesn't look awesome. So how to make it look amazing? Well, it's different in a way that that's already an existing app. It has people, they're apparently loving it for something. So that's a little different from getting started from the ground up. What would you do in that case?
Yeah, so I've been there as well for my apps where I need to go back and I need to do a complete redesign. So like you mentioned, there's so many apps out there that are either carbon copies or closed copies, and so what I try to do is I try to break things down to the single element on the page that is a useful experience for the person who's going to be using the product. So let's say the element I break it down to is a list, and that list contains some objects, and there's going to be an edit button, right? Or a delete button. That's going to be a repeating group in Bubble. So at that case, what I want to do is I want to go out and I want to see how some of the top designers are making just that element. And so I'm not going to focus on all these different templates or options out there. What I'll do is I'll go to a site like Dribbble that showcases really, really clean design. And I will look for templates. Usually it's a dashboard or some sort of admin panel. And I will completely blank out everything except for that one repeating group that looks like a repeating group, right? Or something that very closely mimics it. And I will try to just put it on one side of my screen and then Bubble on the other, and just like pixel for pixel, try to like recreate it. And it's kind of goes back to the notion of like good artist copy, great artist steal, where if you're rebuilding in Bubble and you have never built something like a design system from scratch, it's totally all right to go out and like the things that are put out there by professional designers, they really don't care if you are taking one of their elements, using it as inspiration in your app. So again, if someone's done it, then you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
For sure. I would say most of them would be flattered, even so. Yeah, that's +1 to your karma.
Yeah. And then just, I'd say the most important part of that point too is don't try to go out and like clone an entire page, break it down. Reusable elements in Bubble, I think people don't use them enough, because with reusable elements, you're really creating your own section of elements. And so you can use that as a design library, in fact. So, my reusable elements contain my repeating groups that I want to use. And then you can obviously change them up, but reusable elements are really powerful in that regard.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. There's actually a lot more under Bubble's hood, both in terms of design and functionality, that is kind of widespread, even in the advanced, let's say, section of Bubble developers. So there's much more that we'll tap into in the coming years of working with Bubble. Thanks, Brent. I think that answers the question perfectly. All right. There's the next question from Suzanne asking, she's wondering, would you say that one of the challenges of no code is that many founders skip the what problem are you solving part and go straight to the solution because it's so fast and relatively inexpensive to build, basically a two-edged sword?
Totally. Yeah. So I'd say it's super common to skip steps, and the steps can be anything from I am skipping the problem because I want the solution, or even I have the problem and I am just going to race to build the solution while doing minimal validation. So I think one of the main points from looking at my past examples is what I call soft validation versus hard validation. So I think with Bubble and with any other no code tool that makes it really easy to build, it can be very easy to just get soft validation, which maybe it's 10 friends that say they really love the idea and they have that problem, or it's a conversation on social media or a blog post. You say, great, I'm going to build it. And then you go and build it. Whereas hard validation is, I call it hard validation because it's much harder to get, but it's also much more solid. A hard validation point means you've gotten on the phone with someone who might have this product, and by the end of the call, you have them committed to pay for it when it's out. Right, that's a super hard thing to do, right? A pre-order, right? Yeah. And a lot of people, because it's scary and they don't want to add, they don't want to send someone a pre-order page or ask for a credit card before something's ready. Then they'll kind of do a soft commitment and maybe say it's a hard commitment, right? So I can trick myself. I can get off a call with someone and say, so you'll use this when it's out, right? And you'll pay for it. And they'll say, oh yeah, sure.
Yeah,
but then when it actually comes time to pay for it, they disappear. It's like, until you actually have someone's credit card down, then they're not a paying customer. It's the exact same thing for validation. Until you have like a commitment or that's somewhat firm, then, it's a soft validation. So that's what I'd say, a lot of people spend time on is just, they're so excited to build with no code that they either skip over the problem entirely, or they validate softly versus the really strong validation that we're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Brent. The only thing I would add to that is that there's an amazing book on that same problem called The Mom Test. Do read it. I mean, it's amazing. It's fun to read. It's written by a very straight to the point kind of person in a very conversational style, and it solves that question and a lot more. So definitely go for it. I mean, that will be a perfect complement to what Brent has just shared from his own experience.
Great.
All right. Next question about the all the no-code platforms. So there's a question that the person is confused that there are so many no-code platforms out there, but which one should you choose? I guess that's one of these general but very important questions for people that are getting started. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it's so confusing. It's way more confusing today than it was when I was getting started with no code, where it was, kind of bubble, and then Webflow was just starting out, and you were kind of picking between the two. Because now there's, Wix, Squarespace, Bubble, Webflow, Card, Glide, Atalo, just you could spend probably an entire week just looking up no code products to build off of. And I think when it comes to looking at each one in the research, it's not going to be very time smart to just go and sign up for a trial each one and try each product out. So I think you really need to rely on social media or people that have done it before. So really what you need to start by doing is thinking through the requirements that you think for your MVP. So if I'm thinking about developing an idea and I want just a pre-order page, then my set of requirements are, it could be a website that's a form that I need to collect someone's email address, and I want to collect some sort of prepayment. And I could go out there and, I could build that myself in Bubble. I could probably get something like that in Card or Webflow hooked up. But probably the easiest thing to do is going to be to go to Gumroad, set up, my merchant ID, set up a pre-order page, and then that's probably the fastest path. So how do I get there, right? Because I obviously knew about Gumroad. So, but what if you don't know about Gumroad, right? I'd say social media is probably going to be the best way. So sites like Indie Hackers, subreddits for entrepreneurs, and Twitter, just asking people, just saying like, hey, I want a payment page and I want to build it without code. What would you recommend? And just people will help you because the community is based on so many people having done things before and helping others. But yeah, I'd say don't be surprised if you get multiple answers from vendors that are excited about their new products, and they'll try to sell you on it. It's a wild, wild world. And I hope more people tackle that problem.
Yeah, for sure. There's no silver bullet, definitely. But check out Brent's website about launchingmyself.com, and you may actually get more insight about which tools were used for which type of projects, which ones worked and which ones didn't. So yeah, thanks for that question, and thank you for that very detailed answer, Brent.